welcome everyone to our next legislative forum, which is going on right now. It's going to be a little different than our other referendum forums in that one of our representatives and one of our senators isn't present here today. Representative Griffin is out of town in Washington, D.C., as I understand it, and Representative Dennis Casey is in the committee meetings at the Capitol and could not get away to be here today. But we are great enough to have with us today Representative John Pfeiffer, who from District 38, who is here to share with us today the current status of what's going on at the legislature. And to start it off with, John, we had a big vote this last week dealing with who the new speaker will be next year, at least a preliminary vote. We
did. The State House of Representatives chose a speaker designate. The caucus got together and presuming that Republicans still hold the majority, which I think will be the case come November, he will be the person who's going to be leading the House over the next year. The final vote happens, I believe it's in January on Organizational Day. It was an interesting week because just the week before the Senate had picked its new pro tem designate because pro tem Brian Mingman was term limiting out and Speaker Jeff Hickman were both term limiting out. So we're going to see new leadership in both the House and the Senate. So the new speaker, or the new president pro tem of the Senate is going to be Senator Schultz from Altus, a longtime farmer there, and he's got 2 years left, so he'll be pro tem for 2 years. And the new Speaker of the House will be Representative Charles McCall from Atoka. I've known Charles for the whole time I've been in the legislature. He currently serves as the chairman of the, I always get these subcommittees confused, the Appropriation and Budget Subcommittee on Taxation and Revenue. Charles is the president of a bank down there in Atoka, serves as a city councilman and a mayor, a lot of leadership experience, and I think he'll do a great job. And he has a long time left, so has the potential to be a 4-year speaker. So hopefully he can add some stability to the House of Representatives where we're not changing leadership and leadership styles every couple of years like we have been. And I really do. I think Charles is a great guy, and I think he'll do a great job as we kind of move forward. Because the House is going to need some strong leaders. We're going to have at least 30 new members of the House of Representatives next year. Between people term limiting out and people not running again, there will be at least 30 new members. Depending on who wins, loses races and things like that, we could see a lot more, but we'll definitely have 30 new faces. And when you figure that in with the group of people that I came in with, which is a little over 20, out of a 101 member body, over 50 of them will have, well, at most like me, 2 years of experience. But so over 50% will have less than 5 years experience.
Wow.
There's going to be a lot of turnover, a lot of institutional knowledge lost, but also kind of an influx of new ideas and maybe a different way of looking at things. And definitely some change up in leadership. So a lot of our chairman positions are term limiting out in the House of Representatives, and where there's not just a whole lot of people left, there's a lot of room kind of up at the top. And I think in the House you're going to see a lot of people moving up very rapidly to chairman positions before they historically would have. And I know Speaker McCall and I, or Speaker Designate McCall and I have talked a lot. And one of the things that I think that we've kind of gotten into that we need to get away from in the House of Representatives is almost like a seniority system. This person deserves a chairmanship because they've been here X amount of years. And when Representative McCall and I talked, it was a lot of who can do the best jobs in the committees they're going to be assigned. And I think we're going to see a lot of that, partly just out of necessity, because the people who have been running these committees for years are gone, and I think it's going to go back to kind of a merit-based system. Who has expertise, who has leadership, who's shown true potential, and can they get the job done? And I think we're going to see that.
Outstanding. Well, we've had a lot happening in the last few weeks. I know we had last time we were here, there were some deadlines coming up. Where are we right now in the legislative process?
Right now, today was the last day to reject Senate amendments on the House and send things to conference committee. Basically, if the Senate amends a bill, the House author brings it back over to the House, and you can either accept Senate amendments because both chambers have to pass a piece of legislation with identical language in it. So if you accept those Senate amendments, so basically you accept your bill as amended, it can go on and go to the governor. If you don't like what the Senate did to your bill, which happens from time to time, or have a little difference of opinion, you reject Senate amendments and send it to a conference committee. Conference committee is basically made up of House members that the Speaker assigns, Senate members that the Pro Tem assigns. They meet together, they hash out their issues, and then bring compromise language or however the fix they have on that bill back to both bodies so it can pass and go forward to the governor. So today was the last day, because of the length of the conference process, how it takes a little time. Today was the last day to reject any Senate amendments and send anything to conference. We've had a lot of stuff go to conference, and in a year like this, most of the HJRs, Senate Joint Resolutions, HJRs, House Joint Resolutions have all basically been sent to conference, title stricken, things like that, so that in kind of preparation for either an August runoff election or the November general election, trying to figure out what we're going to put on the ballot, trying to keep it down. We have a lot of initiative petitions started. We have some resolutions that have already been passed out of the House, and the big concern right now is almost voter fatigue, because we're looking at a situation where we could have a 2-page ballot in November, which besides just the other, the practical points that it takes a lot of time to read that kind of language. People don't necessarily like to read all that kind of stuff. It cost about an extra $600,000 is the last estimate I heard to print a 2-page ballot. So in tight budget years like this, trying to figure out what we need to put on the budget, and what needs to happen this year in terms of amending the Constitution, ballot initiatives, things like that, or what we're going to see. They're also holding off mainly because of size, and the reason, if we try to pass any revenue raising measures, an increase in cigarette tax, increase in service taxes, or starting service taxes, anything like that, they have to pass by a supermajority in the House and the Senate. If they don't pass by a supermajority in the House and the Senate, we still have the option to put that on the ballot and send that out to a vote of the people. So trying to figure out what revenue measures will be on the ballot, and how much room we have left for SJRs and HJRs is why those things are kind of all in
Now, a lot of people don't know what a supermajority is. Would you explain that?
It's a supermajority is a 3/4 vote of the House and Senate. So my math's not real good. It should be 68 members of the House, and they have 48 members of the Senate, so 3/4 of whatever that is. AJ handles the Senate stuff. I just send them bills and they pass them.
All right, all right. Now, one would think that as we get a little further into the session, we know all the bills, we know what they all contain, there are no surprises, but there kind of was a surprise in the past couple of weeks with, based on a decision by the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Talking about the rape law.
The rape law, yes. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals basically stated, kind of overturned some of the previous precedent they had set and fell back on a law that was actually changed back in the 80s dealing with rape cases. It's kind of garnered national attention, and not in the good way that Oklahoma wants to garner national attention for, like OU winning a national championship or the Thunder finally winning a game. It's one of those things. It's one of those things that is a loophole that we have to try to get fixed. The problem with fixing something like this when it arises, because of the deadlines we have in place, we have to find an existing bill that exists in that title of law, dump the language out of it, put a new definition to help protect our citizens in there, and get that in the process. Luckily, because we're in the second year of the 55th session, any bills that did not pass or did not get sent to the governor kind of stay where they're at in the process. So if it passed out of committee but didn't make it to the floor last year, it's still at that stage in the game. They found a piece of legislation that was actually in the conference committee part of the game, which is good because that's where the deadline we're at. That is in the right title of law, and they're going to be able to fix it. A good friend of mine, Representative Scott Biggs, who's a former assistant district attorney, has been working on it. I know AJ or Senator Griffin is the Senate author, and this is something we need to get fixed. And again, I'm no attorney, but the way it was explained to me is that basically being intoxicated was not, like, they didn't have the testamentary capacity basically to say no in a forcible rape case, which is an extremely, the courts interpret the laws. I can't argue with them, but it's definitely a loophole that we have to get fixed because it's an extremely dangerous public safety issue and loophole to leave out there.
In defense of the courts, the general rape statute says that is not a defense, and it doesn't have the same language in the other portion of the statute, and therefore they felt that had to be in the other portion which you are fixing.
Right.
And it's great that the legislature can react so quickly to fix such a change.
And luckily we had something that we could put that language in and go, because it's definitely a major loophole that has to get fixed for our state.
One of the major bills that have also been getting a lot of television play lately has been the change in the DUI laws. Would you tell citizens about that?
Right now, as it is, local municipalities have the right to issue DUI citations. They go through municipal court, but there's no comprehensive kind of record-keeping system for that. Each municipality keeps kind of its own individual records, as opposed to anything that goes through, say, your office or the state courts where there's a centralized record base. What this is kind of allowed to do is the multiple offenders will get multiple DUIs in different municipalities. Not just an FYI, not that this has happened to me, but if I got a DUI in Perry one day and then over in Perkins in the next and things like that, the normal case of events, I would lose my license, lose my ability to drive, things like that. But because they're happening in different towns and the municipalities don't talk to one another, we're having people stack up 4, 5, 6, sometimes, just several multiple DUIs. They're able to keep their license, are able to keep driving as their cases make their way through these different municipal courts. And this was a problem, and actually the bill's author, Senator Mike Sanders from Kingfisher, actually impacted him personally because his wife was hit by a drunk driver who had multiple DUIs. And after he checked on her, made sure everything was okay, he kind of got upset. He goes, well, why is this person still able to drive? And as we dug into this, we realized this really is a problem. So what this legislation will do is kind of create more of a centralized database for DUI offenders and also put the DUIs back in the district courts so that we have kind of a central clearinghouse. There's one place they go, one person that deals with them, and a database so that people aren't able to just continually rack up these dangerous DUIs.
It's my understanding that only applies to municipal courts not of record. So Tulsa and Oklahoma County, seeing they have the database system in place, they can do it, but basically every other municipal court would not.
Correct. And the way I also understand if they, and I don't know the exact process, but if a city or municipality went back in and put in the centralized database system like Oklahoma City has or Tulsa has, that they would then be able to process their own DUI cases, which I know brings in some revenue to the cities, but when we don't have a place to adequately enforce our laws, we have these repeat offenders, we have to do something just for a public safety standpoint.
From what I have heard, the process to become a court of record is huge. And most cities that have looked at it, even like Cleveland County where Norman is, they've decided it's too much of a hassle to try to do that. They may change their mind now, but at least historically. Well, last time we met, we also talked about the concealed carry bill. What's the status of that?
The concealed carry, there's a
non-concealed carry.
Non-concealed carry. Yeah. There's actually two of them. There's an SJR that would deal with a ballot referendum on kind of Second Amendment rights, concealed carry, what classes you have to go through, open carry, same sort of thing. Again, all of those resolutions are in conference committee waiting, and there's a House bill that basically what they're kind of deeming constitutional carry, that anybody who wants to open carry a weapon can. And right now, it's in the conference committee. The House passed it out. The Senate passed it out with amendments. The House author rejected the Senate amendments, and they're trying to figure out a way to make it work. There were some flaws in the original language. Some things that needed to go back and deal with training. some things that need to go back and deal with where you could actually open carry. I know it's something that a lot of our college campuses are really worried about. Common education, so anywhere pre-K through 12th grade schools, were specifically opted out of that. I couldn't walk into Perry High School with an open carry weapon, but higher education was not. And I know that's one of the issues they're looking at, and some of the training options. So right now they're just trying to figure out a good compromise and move that bill forward.
I know a lot of law enforcement have concerns about it. The officers that talk to me about walking up to a group of people where everyone's got a sidearm, maybe even gang people, and they're all legally carrying guns. I know there's some concerns about that, and I also know the DAs unanimously passed a resolution opposed to because of the lack of training and the lack of safety for law enforcement officers. So.
And that was some of my concerns with the initial language, and I guess it kind of goes back to my time in the Marine Corps. I don't have a problem with anybody exercising their Second Amendment rights. I've also been next to 18-year-old kids who were just learning, and it's the first time they'd ever held a gun. That gets a little nervous on the firing line, and I think I truly believe in everybody should own a gun. I own several myself, but they need to have the proper training to exercise that right in a safe, responsible manner.
Absolutely. There has also been a lot of talk in the newspaper lately about selling of alcohol and strong beer in grocery stores. What is the status of that?
It's SJR 68. It passed out of the House and Senate. Again, it's in conference committee. The Supreme Court just struck down an initiative petition that would put it on the ballot automatically. I do think of all the stuff that's going on the ballot, SJR 68 is on the top of the list. Basically, in the Oklahoma Constitution, and we have one of the, when they passed the state constitution back in 1907, it was the longest state constitution ever passed. We spelled out a whole lot of ifs, ands, or buts all right there in the Constitution, which was great, except that when it comes time to change, it makes it extremely difficult to change and update things. We have to take everything to a vote of the people. What SJR 68 would do would basically take some of the alcohol provisions that are currently in our Constitution and basically bring them back to the statutory level so that the legislature can pass laws on them without going back to a vote of the people for every single thing that we wanted to change in our alcohol laws. There is a trailer bill, Senate trailer bill, that deals with the specifics on selling cold beer in liquor stores, High Point beer in gas stations, High Point beer in gas stations and grocery stores, wine in grocery stores, and would also allow liquor stores to sell, for lack of a better word, basically alcohol paraphernalia. Because right now in Oklahoma law, you can go to a liquor store and buy a bottle of wine, but they cannot sell you a wine bottle opener. So there is some give and take and some compromise on that level. I do think it will go to a vote of the people this year, and I think from some of the polling I've seen and just some of the conversations I've had, I think this is one of the things that Oklahomans really want to move forward. I know in several of the counties I represent, they've passed laws kind of updating their county and municipal alcohol statutes. Back in 2014, Grant County passed liquor by the drink. Just here during the primary elections, Logan County passed a referendum that allowed them to sell alcohol on Sundays, things like that. We're slowly kind of advancing and modernizing our liquor laws more towards like what some of the states are more around us. It's the kind of the funny old saying is prohibition ended in the 30s everywhere except Oklahoma, and we kept it going as long as we can. And I think as we see kind of a shift in our state, we see this is something that people care about and are trying to get motivated to change. I know when Senator Bice kind of first brought this issue up last year, she was a freshman senator, came in just like me from out around Piedmont, and she came in and she goes, "We want cold High Point beer to be able to be sold in liquor stores." And everybody kind of laughed at her because, this is Oklahoma. We don't change things like that. This is a law, so it's how everybody wants things. So we just don't change it. And she kept doing a lot of research and kept getting just more and more support behind this, and there really was a big section of our population that are kind of moving towards more of that way of thinking, that they want to update these things, and kind of from her work last year is what led to SJR 68 and the kind of the follow-on bills that'll follow.
And again, in this case, the DAs of the state have voted to not take a position other than to say that if you're going to pass this, make sure there's some funding for law enforcement, for mental health, and for prosecution, because there's going to be more issues addressed in all those three areas.
There is, and during the debate on this SJR on the floor, those concerns were brought out, along with some other concerns. Right now with low point beer sales through gas stations, 3.2 beer, you can have a 16-year-old working a register and selling it over the counter. Anytime you have 16-year-olds, no offense to 16-year-olds, I used to be one, doing anything, there's a chance that their friends could talk them into doing something they shouldn't, or they do something they know is wrong, but trying to fit in, things like that. One of the things they're still trying to work out in the follow-on bill, once we get the constitutional authority back to change these things, is at what age will we allow cashiers to actually sell this higher point of beer and wine. And there has been also talk of kind of increasing and changing our alcohol tax as we modernize to fund the things that are going to come out of this. More DUIs, more mental health cases, and more substance abuse cases, theoretically. So I don't know. And I don't know, I haven't seen the science. Do you think, and I'm going to ask your opinion here, do you think that easier access to higher point alcohol will lead to more cases? Or is, if people are predisposed to abuse certain substances, they're going to do it?
Well, obviously they can drink less amount of beer and become more intoxicated with a higher point beer. So
right.
It would be logical to assume that they're going to be able to, that people will overdrink, and also the fact that it's easier access. It's not having to find a liquor store that's open and running to it, but it's at a gas station, or there's been some people that always have said, what makes sense about cold beer in a place where you drive in and drive away? There's always been that concern expressed, but most people drink responsibly, but there's that group of people that don't understand, don't drink and drive, and right. So we expect there'll be an increase, an uptick in DUIs, and because of that there'll be an uptick in negligent homicides and manslaughter, DUI, manslaughters, and the like. So there's a risk to any of this, but it appears that there's a momentum toward this movement, and we're not taking a position. We think that issue is for the legislature to decide. We just want proper education, proper mental health care, and for law enforcement and prosecutions to be funded appropriately so we can handle that uptick.
Right. And I agree with that. And one of the interesting things when we look at going back and backfilling funding some of this stuff to deal with the upcoming changes in the law is actually how things like beer are actually taxed. And I don't know, I think Dennis talked about this last time a little bit. I didn't know, and learn something new every day, but that the percentage of tax that are put on beer isn't based on the bottle or 12-ounce can or anything like that. It's actually based on the amount of tax placed on a barrel of beer, and then it's kind of cycled on down. So it makes it extremely interesting, and again, it kind of shows how outdated some of our laws are, because I haven't talked to any brewers, but I don't think they actually sell much beer by the barrel anymore, and trying to update those laws and taxation codes and stuff.
In Stillwater, they might sell a lot of kegs.
Well, yes.
Especially last weekend with the calf fry.
Yes.
In the ag area, which I know is a concern of yours, there has been some recent movement toward cattle rustling, passing of a bill. The governor actually signed my cattle rustling bill. Basically, it would allow district attorneys more leeway in how to charge cattle rustling. They could charge they could charge for each individual head stolen. It also gives more opportunities to pay kind of retributions back to the rancher and kind of make them whole again. And I think one of the things
bill kind of got debated on the floor before it passed pretty overwhelmingly. One of the things I keep trying to bring up to some of my more urban colleagues, and partly it's guys like, it's our fault that we keep preaching that farming and ranching is a lifestyle. And it is, because it definitely doesn't make a lot of money. You really have to love what you're doing to do it. And sometimes I think when we say it's a lifestyle so much, they also forget that it's also a business. That my cows and many other cows have bank liens on them and things like that, that I don't have enough cash on hand to go buy a whole load of cows, and much less stalker steers and things like that. And when somebody sells or steals and then goes out and sells 1, 2, 10 head of your cows, I think they stole a couple hundred head from Brahms Dairy, things like that. It ultimately impacts your ability to go back and repay loans, qualify for future credit, continue to grow your operation and things like that. And I was glad to kind of bring that back to the forefront on the floor and let people realize that farming and ranching is a business. It's a business with very tight margins a lot of times. And so that when somebody comes in, and all crimes impact people in different ways, but all property crimes impact them monetarily. But when you steal somebody's business, and they kept trying to say, well, if you steal somebody's TV or something like that, why are you getting punished? I'm like, but a cow or steer, whatever you steal, a head of cattle isn't like a TV. It's not a luxury item. It's basically like its own little bitty factory out there making you money. And if you came into any business and stole, a huge portion of their inventory, it would put a serious business implication on it. Kind of put them in bad news, and then they've got to go to their local banker who's went out on a limb, and in an ever kind of increasing regulatory environment with banks where it's becoming harder and harder to lend to ag producers anyways, to have that kind of negative black mark through no fault of your own on your record could seriously impact your ability to get into it. And I think this is something for people my age and younger that are looking to get back into farming and ranching, something that kind of gives them a little bit of stability to try to help prevent against these crimes, and to the threat or the amount of punishment and things like that went along with cattle rustling hasn't really necessarily kept track with the current cattle markets. When they originally kind of redid all the statutes back in the 30s, and then went back in the late 60s, early 70s, and kind of updated the cattle rustling statute, you're still looking at pretty cheap stocker cows. I checked the markets the other day, and something that was $200, $300, $400 back in 1970s, $1,100, $1,200 now. Kind of through the increase in price of cattle and the increase of inflation and stuff like that, we have to kind of increase the punishment to dissuade people, or at least try to make them take a second look at going back and committing crimes like this.
There have been some bills also dealing with drugs in Oklahoma. I think we all agree that drugs are a true problem in Oklahoma and throughout the country. Can you tell us a little bit of the status of the drug bills?
I know several of the drug bills were kind of packaged in a form that the governor was pushing through, kind of a criminal justice reform package, to deal with some new information that we've gotten through the past 10 to 20 years dealing with drug-related crimes, and two, to deal with the simple fact that our prisons are at about 110% capacity, trying to get not necessarily away from some of the tough on crime things, but more to a smart on crime things. It increased. I know it was spread out over several bills. I know one of them tried to increase and make better use of the drug court system that we have in the state, which I think's had a lot of success. Trying to get away from incarcerations for just simple possession charges. When we get into distribution of illegal narcotics, then that's a whole different thing. But high school kids making a mistake and having possession charges, trying to get away from that. And also, one of the things that unfortunately tends to go hand in hand with drug use is property crimes, stealing things and of that nature. And so one of the things that the governor's position passed was moving the dollar amount from a misdemeanor to a felony. It was $500, and is now going to be $1,000. And there's some other stuff in there giving district attorneys more discretion, giving judges more discretion on what to do, dealing with mandatory minimums and stuff like that. We started the war on drugs, back in the 80s, I believe, in force, and we found, unfortunately, I wish it would, but just throwing people in prison for doing drugs doesn't stop them from doing drugs. If there was, you mentioned it before, of anything that poses long-term risk to our state and our nation, across all facets of government, whether it's public education, criminal justice, corrections, healthcare, anything like that, drugs is definitely one of the biggest problems we've seen. And a lot of it happens here in Oklahoma because we have major highway intersections.
Yes.
Just the other day we had a report from the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. It's been a couple months ago, where they talked about the rising increase in the distribution and use of heroin in the state of Oklahoma. And I knew we had problems with crystal meth and stuff like that. And basically they said that most of the heroin used to come from Asia, Afghanistan, Korea, places like that. They'd import it in. Well, the Mexican cartels felt like, in true capitalistic fashion, felt like they were getting cornered on a market. So they started producing vast poppy fields in Mexico. And because of that, we've seen a drop in the price of heroin. It was an amazing amount. It was like 110% increase in the use of heroin, and a very large amount increase in the amount of heroin traffic through the state of Oklahoma. And it's a constant strain on law enforcement.
We're not seeing a ton of heroin yet in this district. We started seeing some of it show up, but I understand Tulsa has been hard hit with heroin, and we're starting to see some of that kind of drift our way, unfortunately. Certainly the crystal meth and such is all over the place. I would take issue with one thing, is that I have received letters on more than one occasion from people that we have put in prison, and when they get released, they write letters and say, I couldn't kick my addiction out out of jail, and the fact that you put me in jail allowed me a chance to get away from my friends and get away from the drugs, and have kicked it. In fact, we had a gentleman this morning, I got paperwork on a guy that showed up in Blackwell, Oklahoma, surrendered, just walked into the police department and said, I've been smoking marijuana, I've got some in my pocket, I can't stop doing it, will you please arrest me so I can stop? And interesting case.
Yeah.
So we don't see enough of that.
Yeah.
But I understand also there is a drug initiative that's being pushed, which may not get on the ballot, seeking to make all possessory crimes of any type of drug a misdemeanor.
I have heard that. I don't know where it's at in the signature process. I think that's incredibly dangerous when we're talking broad spectrum everything. I have tremendous amount of respect, and I'm not just saying this because it's you here with me. I have tremendous amount of respect for all our district attorneys and their offices and what they do on very slim budgets across the state. And it's almost kind of swinging the pendulum too far back. A few years ago when we started putting all these mandatory minimums, a mandatory minimum sentence on certain crimes. It took the discretions away from the district attorneys to make deals. It took the discretions away from the judges to adequately sentence people for what they felt the crimes would be. And it just kind of tried to broad spectrum things from the legislature. And that obviously didn't work, and we've got to see, we're seeing some reshifting in that. If we go too far the other way, I worry about what's already kind of an epidemic type spread of drugs across the state.
And recently the legislature, I think, gave the judges the power to go below the mandatory minimums, and the DAs have always had the ability to file paperwork and go below them. And that's been a great way of resolving cases when we can do that. Other legislation out there that you think is important for the people to know about, that you're following, that's up and coming?
The budget, we haven't talked about a whole lot.
Talk about the budget.
A whole lot here
Goodness.
since sitting here. The budget's going to be rolling out here in the next couple of weeks, I do believe. In a tough financial year like this, trying to find compromises so that 149, well, at least 51 people in the House and 25 people in the Senate will vote yes. it is going to be extremely difficult, especially since, and you know, we all like this not to play a part in it, but especially since this is an election year. And that's something else that's happened. Since we had more people file for elected positions this year than we ever have before in the history of the state of Oklahoma. There's not a single senator, their open Senate seat or sitting incumbent senator that is currently running unopposed. There's only, I think, 14 House members out of the 101 seats.
And 2 of them are in our district.
And Dennis and I are 2 of those lucky 14 that are running unopposed. So we've seen a lot more political involvement in the state. That being said, we have a lot of members that have rough races. They have primary opponents, they have general election opponents, and unfortunately, whether it's right or wrong, it's kind of the political realities of things. The safe vote on the budget's always no, because there's always, on a bill that covers so much, there's always going to be something in there that you don't like, or something in there that somebody in your district doesn't like. So it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to vote no, and so when my county commissioner's mad because they don't get enough road money, I can say I voted no. Or I'm going to vote no when my teachers come and say, you know, we didn't get new textbook money, I'm a no. So trying to find a budget that can get 51 votes in the House of Representatives, I think is going to be incredibly difficult this year. Especially considering, for the most part, the Democrat caucus always votes no on a budget proposed by a Republican caucus. It's, you know, for those of you watching at home, you say, "Oh, that's bad. Why do they do that?" In all fairness, when the Democrats were in control, the Republicans always voted no on the budget. It's just one of those things. You've already got 30 automatic no votes, and trying to get 51 out of 71 members is going to be difficult. And it's an extremely difficult process. We've looked at tax credits, we've looked at revenue raising measures, we looked at exemptions, and right now we're just trying to find enough pieces of the puzzle to get it all into kind of one form and move forward. And that's actually where Representative Casey is tonight. Besides the general kind of omnibus budget bill, they produce several joint committee on budget bills, JCAB bills. And as Vice Chairman of Appropriation and Budgets, Representative Casey sits on the JCAB committee, and they are going through lots of budget bills tonight. And hopefully we can get a budget done and passed shortly.
Great. Final words about for this session here.
It's basically that your representatives, regardless of what you read on Facebook or you read on the news or don't hear on the news a lot of times, or regardless of what sometimes even the governor says, this legislature has taken this revenue situation we have in the state very seriously. Work started before session even began on possible alternatives to the budget. I don't always agree, and for that matter, I don't always even like some of the people we work with, but most of them work very, very hard at their jobs. And I know, especially in this time of kind of wild, crazy politicalness brought on by the national stage, everybody's fed up with politicians, they're fed up with politics in general. They're all out for themselves, none of them are ever doing anything. And I chuckle when I see that kind of stuff on Facebook, because whether I agree with them or not, most of my colleagues really do want to do what they believe is best for their districts and what's best for the state of Oklahoma and move it forward. When people come and visit up at the Capitol, and somebody from the other political party walks by and you say hi and you shake your hands and laugh with them, they kind of go, well, "You like that guy?" And I'm like, "Yes, for the most part I like him personally." We can disagree politically, but we can come together and work on important issues and get something good done for the state of Oklahoma. And especially this year, nobody's going to be happy with what the final budget looks like. And that's just kind of the realities of the situation. It's going to cut things that are important to all of us. And we're all just going to have to kind of spread the pain around, if you will, and take a little bit on the chin and try to do some structural reforms along the way so we don't find ourselves in this situation again in the future. But we are working. Most of the time it's cordial, and I hopefully we will have a budget here shortly.
I haven't heard about any fistfights on the floor of the House or Senate, so
Not yet,
that's a good
not this
sign.
year.
Well, that's all we have for today. We will have one more legislative forum the first Thursday in June, which I believe is June 2nd. It'll be at 3 o'clock. Hopefully we'll have our whole crew together again and look at the wrap-up of the session, see what has happened, what's passed and what's been signed by the governor, what didn't get to go through, and we'll give you a good outcome. Most of those bills will go in effect in November 1, some in July if there's an emergency attached, and we'll talk about all those next month. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, Representative Pfeiffer, for taking all the questions and giving all the answers today. Thank you and good night.